Hi friends! If you don't know me, my name is Kate. I run a small clothing brand called Mini Grease Studios. You can follow me on Instagram. Today's video I'm actually super excited about. Today we are going to knit a sweater, and not just any sweater. We're gonna knit a Raglan style sweater. I thought I would just take you along as I knit the Raglan sweater. I think I'm gonna do some stripes. I think I'm gonna do some flare sleeves. I really don't have a solid plan. I'm just gonna kind of let it take me where it wants me to go. I'll take you guys along in the process. I'll be showing you guys how I do the raglan in this video, but I kind of wanted to leave it a bit open. So I'll be teaching you more of the technique. You can obviously follow along with the exact sweater that I'm knitting, but I want to challenge you guys a bit to learning the actual raglan technique. It can open up a lot of opportunity to make different things. You can change the way it looks based on the yarn that you're using and also the needle size. So this is just a little bit of the basics of a raglan sweater. I'll read you the definition of a raglan that I found on Google. A raglan sleeve is a sleeve that extends in one piece fully to the collar, leaving a diagonal seam from underarm to collarbone. My favorite part of the raglan is that it's all done in one piece. So you'll only have like a few ends to weave in at the end, and you don't really need to seam it all up. Then again, I'm doing a striped sweater, so it'll definitely be more than that. I made this sweater last year, and I want to kind of emulate the way that this sweater looks, but in a raglan style, as far as like the width of the stripes and stuff. So the materials that I'm using for this video are 2 of these giant balls of big twist yarn. I'll try to put here like how much I actually use. I don't know exactly how much I'll use. And then you don't really need one of these, but I always like to use a ball winder. If you knit or crochet and you don't own one of these, I would definitely invest in one because they're just really convenient. Ball winder, optional, US 19 needles. I got these from my local yarn store, but I'm pretty sure they sell them on Amazon. US 15 needles for the ribbing on the neckline. Then you're going to want 2 different colored stitch markers. I'm just going to use these scrap pieces, and then more scrap yarn to tie off your sleeves. Some scissors. I like to have a notebook to write my rows down. You're also going to need a tapestry needle. We moved my couch because I was not going to sit
on the floor and knit for several hours.
Our first step is going to be casting on and doing ribbing rows. I'm going to cast on 49 stitches. I'm not just making that up. That number is just something that I've experimented with and usually works out for me. I'm basing it off of several sweaters that I've already made. Feel free to cast on any number of stitches that is a reliable neckline amount for you. I'm going to use the long tail cast on method. I'll link a few basics tutorials down below because I don't have any on my channel yet. I casted on my 49 stitches and it's gonna look like it's tiny, but it stretches out since the needles are so big, trust me. But a little trick, to join these 2 in the round, you have your working strand on one side with that extra stitch. What you're gonna wanna do is slip that stitch off onto the other needle, and then you're gonna knit the first stitch and then the slipped stitch together. And it might be a little tough at first because it's all tight. That avoids leaving like a little dip when you just join regularly. So now I'm just going to put my marker on and I'm going to do a 1-by-1 rib. So that's knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, all the way around. Another thing I should mention is you're going to have a lot of extra cord. You can use the magic loop method. I'll link a tutorial for that too. We have officially finished our 4 rows of 1-by-1 ribbing. That's what it looks like. And the next row, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to switch our needles. I'm switching to a US 19 needle. We're also going to place our stitch markers in 4ths around the neckline. So I'll show you how I do that. From here, we're going to split our neckline into 4 sections. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I'm just going to leave this here so you can come back and reference it if you did cast on a different number of stitches than I did. I'll walk you through 2 different examples. So I usually go for having the front and back sections be double what the sleeve sections are. It's easy to do the math if your neckline stitches are divisible by 6. In my case, I have 48 neckline stitches. I divided that by 6, which gives me the amount of stitches in my sleeve section, so 8 stitches. And if you double that, that will give you how much is in each front and back section. In the case where you don't have an amount of neckline stitches that's divisible by 6, you can just round to the nearest number. This is just an example. I divided 56 by 6, you have 9.3, so I'm going to round to the nearest whole number, which is 9, and then my front and back section ended up being 19. So it's roughly 1 to 2, but if you don't have an evenly divisible number by 6, then you can just do a little bit of rounding and it'll turn out pretty much the same. And this is just the ratio that I tend to go for. You can adjust it to your liking, but I'll just leave the math here, so if you ever want to come back and reference it, then you can. I really hope this makes sense, so DM me on Instagram. If it doesn't, I can help you out. For this sweater, I'm doing 8 stitches in the sleeve section and 16 stitches in the front and back sections. Now we're going to switch our needles, and we're going to do that by just knitting straight onto the new needle. And knit our 8 sleeve stitches. There's 8 stitches, and we're going to place a stitch marker here to signify that we need to increase at that point. Then we're going to knit 16 stitches. Then place another stitch marker to signify the end of that section. Then onto the other sleeve section, which is another 8 stitches. And then our last section will be 16 stitches. Alright, that was 16 stitches, and now all of our stitches are on our bigger needles. And then our last stitch marker will have 2 different colors. So one will signify an increase row and the other will signify just a normal knit row. So in my case, the orange one will signify that I'll be doing an increase row at that point. I like to think of it as orange being different than the other blue stitch markers, so you're doing something different. And then the blue will just signify a normal knitting row. So our next row will be an increase row, so we're going to place our orange stitch marker at the beginning of the row. That was the 5th row that we've knitted, so now we are on our 6th row, which is our first raglan increase row. Now we're just going to increase at our stitch markers. Our sweater will grow from those 4 points. So the first thing we want to do is knit 1 stitch. And then we're going to do an increase called a make 1 left. So if you look in between these 2 stitches, there's a bar. And I think of make 1 left as going from front to back. So we're going to take our left hand needle, and you can grab the bar with your finger, especially with the looser knits. So we're going to take our needle and go from front to back. Then we're going to knit through the back of that loop. So we just did our first make 1 left and we created an extra stitch. Therefore, we did our first increase using the make 1 left method. Then what we're going to do is we're going to knit until there's 1 more stitch before our next stitch marker. Now there's 1 stitch left, so now we're going to do something called a make 1 right. So we're going to find that bar again in between our stitches, but instead of picking up the stitch from front to back, we are going to pick it up from the back to the front. Then we're going to knit through the front of the stitch, and sometimes it can be a little tight on the make 1 rights, so you can just grab it with your fingers to pull it up a little bit. So there, we just did our first make 1 right. Then we're just going to knit that last stitch before our stitch marker, slip our marker, knit the next stitch, and do a make 1 left. And then we're just going to repeat that until we get to the end of our row. A way to remember that I literally just Googled and found out myself is I left through the front door and it'll be right back. So left, front, right, back. And it might take a little bit to get used to, but once you get the hang of it, it goes pretty quickly. So now we're coming up on our 3rd marker. We're going to make 1 right, knit the next stitch, slip our marker, knit the next stitch, and make 1 left. Keep knitting that section until we get to 1 stitch before our beginning of the row stitch marker. Alright, 1 stitch left, so since we started with a make 1 left, we will end with a make 1 right. So back to front, knit through the front of the loop, knit the next stitch, then slip our beginning of the row marker, but now instead of the orange, we will slip it to the blue color. And this is just to signify that this is just a normal knit row. We're pretty much just going to continue to do that. So switching off increase rows and regular rows up until it's the length that we want, and I'll show you kind of how to determine that, or how I decided what that measurement was for me. It's getting dark in here, but I'm just gonna keep knitting. So again, every other row will be an increase row. You'll be increasing each row by 8 stitches each time. That means that each section you're increasing 2 stitches. So I like to keep track of that by writing down the amount of stitches for each section and then the total for each row, just so you can reference back to it if you need to. Also, if you want to make the sweater again, it's good to keep track of it. Or you can even do it in an Excel spreadsheet, which I've done before. Hi again. It's the next day. I did my hair the same, so that's why it looks the same as it did yesterday. Last night I just worked on my Raglan increases, but I forgot to show you guys how I switch color, so I'm going to show you guys how to do that. If you're a beginner, you might not know how to, so I'll just show you how I do it. But right now I want to show you guys how you can try on your garment so you can tell what the shape is a little bit, and you can start making decisions on how long you want your armholes to be. So I'll show you guys how to do that. So I did this part off camera, but all I did was I took a piece of long scrap yarn and I put it on a tapestry needle and fed it through every single one of my stitches, and then I just tied the ends of the scrap yarn in a little bow so the yarn is holding every single stitch, and then you can slip your needles off. I know it's scary, but if you do it right and you secure every single stitch, it should be fine. So that's what I did off camera. I'm gonna try it on now to show you guys what it looks like so far. So this is what it's looking like so far. You want to make sure your front part's on your front, but as you can see, it's just starting to build over the shoulders. Eventually we're going to tie the sleeves off here and then finish the body, and then pick those stitches back up from the sleeves and finish the sleeves. I'm liking the shape so far. This is going to be a sweater, and I don't like when my sweaters are like really close to my armpit. It's really uncomfortable for me. So I'm probably going to go a bit further down with my seam, but I'll show you guys how you can measure this. So I measured 11 inches from just this top seam to where I want the sleeve hole to close up here. So I am going to be knitting until this seam hits 11 inches. Right now it's about 7.5 inches. So I have 11, 3.5, about 3.5 inches to go. But if you don't want to try it on again, you can just measure the seam until it's that. I mean, in my case, it was 11 inches, so until it's 11 inches. And if you were doing something like a shrug, maybe you would want to end it right here because it's not going to have much of an armhole, but since it's a sweater, I'm going to make the seam go down pretty far. So we're going to put our needles back on and continue to knit until I reach that 11 inches for the seam, but I'm going to show you guys how to switch color now. Now we're going to put our needles back on and take out our scrap yarn. And if you're a beginner or you mess up a lot, you can actually leave the scrap yarn in and just knit around it. Then if you mess up, you have a bit of a benchmark that you can go back to, so you can just frog it to that point and the yarn is already holding all your stitches. So that's just another little tip. You want to make sure that you're pulling up the last stitch on the row. Sometimes it can sink below this stitch, so make sure you're grabbing the stitch that's actually on the scrap yarn. Changing color while knitting is actually pretty easy. First, I'm going to put my beginning stitch marker back on my needles, and I will be switching colors on just a regular knit row. I just find that to be a little bit easier, and I'll be switching color every 11th row. We're just going to take our next color, and I usually leave a pretty long tail. But you just insert your needle like a knit stitch and then just start knitting with the green color or your opposite colored yarn. Now we have one stitch left. And now all of our white stitches should now be green stitches. So we're just going to cut the white yarn that's still connected, again leaving a pretty long tail. So now our white is off. Then I take the start of the green and the end of the white and I just tie it in a little bow. And we can assess it later when we weave in the ends. Just checking in. I'm just going to show you guys like the amount of yarn that I've used. So there's still a lot of yarn on these two cakes, just to keep that in mind. I think that my impatience shows through my work because I'm always using bigger needles because I am very impatient. I think that you guys will be surprised at how quickly this actually works up. It's still going to take a lot of time, obviously it's a bigger garment, but I think you'll be surprised with yourself on how fast you can knit a sweater. But I think I'm just gonna sit here and knit a little bit and do my raglan increases until I reach that 11-inch seam. I'm liking the color so far. I'm hoping that you guys are following along. We are now on day 3. So I finished my raglan increases. It is now 11 inches, I think. I'm gonna try it on real quick. Okay, I put the same shirt on that I was wearing yesterday so you guys can compare the progress. So here's where we're at. I'm thinking it's looking pretty good. If you're at this point, you've tried it on, it's feeling pretty comfortable, the armhole size is good for you. Keep in mind that we are going to be casting on a few stitches in between the front and back panels. then you're ready to move on to the next step. I'm gonna double check that I hit that 11 inches. You can also check that measurement on the ground like I showed you yesterday. And of course, if you try it on and you still feel like the armhole is a little bit tight, just continue to knit until it's feeling like you have enough space here. Another thing that I'll mention, I'm doing my 11 rows of color switches, and you want to keep track. If you're tying off the sleeves in the middle of a color row, you should keep track of how many rows you are doing for just the body of that same color. For example, I knit 8 rows of the green, so my next row is going to be 9, 10, 11, and then I'll do a color switch. I'm going to be doing 3 rows of just the body, so I need to keep that in mind because I'll have to do 3 rows of green to continue the sleeve too. So make sure you keep track of that. A good way to do that is use the Tally app. It literally just counts for you. You can write on a piece of paper too. I just find that tapping it's really easy for me. But I'm getting super excited to see how this is going to turn out. And if you've made it this far, how are you doing? Make sure you're stretching your wrists. Go get a snack. Go get a little drink, maybe some lemonade or some tea. And this is a good time to rest if you've been knitting for a while, and come back to me when you're feeling good again and we can continue. So we're back on our needles now. And remember how we have 4 sections? So 2 of those sections are sleeves and the other 2 are the front and back panels. So the way we set it up, our first section of the row is a sleeve. So that is what we're going to be wanting to tie off. And we're going to do this similar to the way that we tied it off to try it on. So we're just going to take some scrap yarn and a needle and feed each stitch onto the tapestry needle. And our last 2 stitches. So now we have all of those sleeve stitches on some scrap yarn. So I'm just going to tie a little bow again. So now all of those stitches are tied off, and what we can do is now slide them all off of our needles. Cool, so now our entire sleeve section is off the needles. I put my beginning stitch marker back on my right needle, and now before I connect the front and back panels together, I'm going to cast on a few extra stitches. And this is kind of an arbitrary number. Since my sleeve is already pretty big and oversized, I don't want to cast on too many stitches or else it'll be too wide. In this case, I'm only going to cast on 4 stitches. If you have a tighter knit or want to make the sleeve hole a little bit wider, then I would cast on more stitches. But in this case, since I have such a loose knit, it's going to be pretty stretched out anyways. I'm only going to cast on 4 stitches. So how I do that is I take my right needle and my working strand. I cast on stitches by just doing like a long tail cast on. There's other methods to do this, I think. So I just take the yarn in my fingers like this. From my thumb, I pick it up from underneath, and then from my pointer, I pick it up forward and pull it through. And then I'll do it again. 2, 3, and 4. And then I'm gonna place that stitch marker I had separating the sleeve back on just so I know where my extra stitches are. And then I'm just gonna keep knitting this section. And now we are knitting the back panel. Okay, we've reached our next stitch marker. So this next section is a sleeve again. So we're gonna tie it off the same way we did the first one. Have our scrap yarn on our tapestry needle, and we're just gonna feed that through all of our stitches. Same thing, we're just gonna tie this in a little bow and double check that all of our stitches are on the scrap yarn. And then same deal. I have 2 stitch markers on either side to keep track of where our casted on stitches are. And then I'm going to cast on my 4 stitches. Slip the marker and continue to knit. And now we are back on our front panel. So both of our sleeves are tied off now. And now that we're all connected from our front and back panel, all we're going to be doing is knitting. No increases or decreases for now. I'm just going to be knitting in the round. Pretty simple. This is my favorite part because it requires not much attention at all. Pretty much just knit away. So I'm back at the beginning, but you'll find that these casted on stitches will be really loose. What I do to fix that is before you knit this section, just kind of pull them out a little bit and get them to be an even tension. They'll chill out after a couple of rows once they get integrated into the piece. Continue to keep track of your rows, especially to keep track of your color switches. Other than that, all you gotta do is knit. Knit until it's the length that you want. If you want it to be shorter, you can knit to that length. If you want it to be longer, keep knitting. So I'm gonna start a little knitting marathon. So I'm gonna put on some YouTube and try to finish the body of the sweater. It's getting there. Okay, again. It is the same day, but later at night. That's why the lighting is so bad. We ran out of daylight. But I made quite the progress in the last couple hours, and I finished the body of the sweater. And this is what it's looking like. So I have 3 green stripes and 2 white stripes. If you need some help visualizing that sleeve hole, here are the tied off sleeves, and then I just continued to knit the whole thing in the round so it's all connected. It's getting there. I'm thinking we can finish it tomorrow. I didn't cast off yet because I wanted to show you guys the method that I use. Originally, I was going to do most of this last green stripe in a ribbing, but then I realized I didn't do any ribbing for this sweater, which is kind of the one that I'm modeling this off of, but instead I did the stock knit all the way to the end and just did like a stretchier cast off. So I think I'm going to do that with this sweater as well. And if you knit, you know that the stock knit is just really annoying because it always curls up, which is why you usually do ribbing at the end of the rows. But since the needles are so big and compared to the yarn size, it's a very loose knit. I don't think it will curl that much just because of how loose it is. It doesn't have like the tension to kind of bounce back into the curl. Keep that in mind. I'm just going to cast off using, it's called Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Cast Off, I think. I'll link a tutorial below, but I'll also show you guys. I learned this a while ago. It's just the cast off method that I've been using. Nothing too fancy. This cast off method is actually pretty easy. You knit your first stitch, and normally with just the regular cast off, you would knit the stitch and then place this stitch over that one, but instead, so you're going to take your working strand and then you're going to go over your needle front to back, then knit a stitch, and then take these 2 stitches and place them over that front stitch. And we'll do it again. So we're going to wrap our working strand around our right needle, knit 1 stitch, and then take those 2 back stitches and put them over our front stitch. Now we have 1 more loop on our needles, and sometimes it's not very seamless, so I'll continue by pulling up another loop next to our last loop and putting our back stitch over our front stitch. And now we're back to the first loop that we casted off. We'll just pull up 1 more loop, place our back loop over the one we just picked up. Then we'll just cut it and pull our end through the loop. And here she is, you guys. And you can see that the hem isn't that rolled because it's not like a tighter knit, so it's not too much of an issue here. But I'll do a try on of the body portion in the morning and show you guys what it looks like. What do we think? We have now reached day 4. Here's the try on of the body portion. So the cast off edge, like I was saying, it only rolls up just a little bit, which I kind of like the way that looks. Obviously, if you want to do ribbing at the bottom, you can do any bind off you want, but that's just the method that I used. We are on our way to a destination called Sleeve Island. You might love it, you might hate it. I personally like sleeves, they go pretty quickly for me. I know originally I said that I wanted to do flare sleeves, but I'm thinking since the armhole is so big, I'm not gonna have to do flare sleeves. It's just gonna be naturally flared. I think I'm just gonna knit a straight sleeve and they'll be pretty oversized. Since it comes down my shoulder quite a bit, I actually won't have to knit that much. I can do another tutorial for sleeve types if you guys want me to do that. I've experimented with like a flare sleeve and a balloon sleeve as well, and I actually learned a little technique this morning. I've had some issues in the past with leaving holes. I'm gonna try this new technique I found on YouTube. I'll link the video below, but I'll show you guys my first attempt at it. So clearly I failed to keep those stitch markers where they should be, so I just placed 2 new stitch markers back on those 4 stitches that we casted on earlier. The first thing we want to do is put all of our stitches back on our needles. So we can take our scrap yarn out. You see how there's a lot of space in between these two stitches? So the tutorial that I linked below, the goal is to kind of fill this gap a little bit so it doesn't leave a hole, which is a common problem with picking up sleeve stitches like that. So we're gonna see if it works. It's also a little bit hard with how loose the knit is. We're faced the right side out. We have this gap here in between our casted on stitches and our, she called them live stitches, so I guess I'll call them that too. But we're just gonna go to the right of the stitch marker and see how it's kind of stretched out a little bit. We're just gonna start pulling up stitches from there. So we're gonna insert our needle from the front. Then we're going to take our yarn and pull up a loop. And we want to make sure this loop is twisting towards the inside so it's hidden. And then we're going to pick up a stitch in each of those casted on stitches. So there's 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we're going to cast on an extra stitch to the left of this stitch marker. Okay, so now we have 6 stitches, which is 2 extra than we originally casted on in the beginning. Then we're just going to place a new stitch marker and knit until we get to the last live stitch before the extra casted on stitch. Okay, so now we've reached that last live stitch and the extra casted on stitch. And we're just going to knit those 2 together. And then continue knitting those 4 casted on stitches. Oh, I guess our stitch marker is going to get stuck, but and then our extra stitch and the first live stitch. And we're just going to do a slip slip knit decrease here. And put our marker back on. So this is the second green row out of 3 that we need to knit after starting our sleeves. So it's looking like there's still a pretty big gap there. But it's not as bad as if you left it alone. Okay, yeah, as you can see here, there's a pretty big hole. I think it's just due to the needles being heavy and kind of stretching it out. There's an end here that we can use to maybe fix it or just kind of loosen the stitches around it. I'm not expecting it to be perfect or anything. I make plenty of mistakes when I knit. I think it kind of adds to the effect of like a handmade sweater. I think just since it's so loose, there's gonna be bigger holes. I mean, obviously even the raglan increases, like it's hard to keep the tension consistent, which is why it looks a little bit more distressed. The extra stitch did help quite a bit with filling in the gap. It's just so loose that it's kind of hard to avoid. So that was our 3rd green row. Now we're gonna move back to the white color and do 11 rows of this, switch back, do 11 rows of green, switch back, however many it takes to get the length of the sleeve that I want. All right, so at this point, we're just gonna knit the sleeves. And since the garment's getting a bit bigger, I would rest it in your lap or something so it's not stretching out with the needles. I'm not gonna do anything fancy for the end of the sleeves either. I'm just gonna do the same exact thing I did for the bottom here. I'll let you guys know the final length of the sleeve. Are you guys excited to finish? We're like almost there. Like we still have 2 sleeves to knit, but in my head, we're almost there. So keep pushing along, you got this. It's the time where we just sit here and knit and watch a ton of TV or listen to a lot of podcasts. Comment down below what you like to consume while you knit or crochet, because then I can go through them and you guys can go through them. Maybe find something new to watch or listen to while you're knitting away, knitting your sweater. Maybe it's your first sweater. Let's hang out and let's make a little community. It's before dark, so I wanted to get this clip really quickly, but I have almost 1 sleeve done. I'll explain. My dilemma right now is I don't want to start another color because I think it would look weird maybe, or maybe it wouldn't, but I kind of like how short it is. Because I feel like when your sleeves are super long, they like get everywhere in the way. But it's also getting weighed down a little bit from the needles, so I can't get like an accurate representation unless I take off the needles. I think what I'm going to do is knit the white section, see how it looks, but I'll put like a little lifeline in right now. And if it doesn't work out, then I can just frog it. Yeah, I just want to document my thought process here so you guys can see how unplanned this is, because it's always changing and this is why I can't write patterns and stuff, but it's coming along. I'm telling you now that I'm going to finish tonight. Yes, it is 10 p.m. but I'm here to document that I finished. I'll do a better try on tomorrow. We're done. This is how it turned out. I had a bit of a photo shoot this morning, so I'll insert some photos. I actually love the fit of it. I love it, and I haven't made a bigger piece like this for myself in so long. The excitement of making a new garment is just so exciting, and I have a new sweater now. I did add this little silk bow because I thought it'd be a nice touch, and I really like the way it looks. Not that original, but I like the texture, so that's what I added. Don't worry, we're almost done. I just wanted to go over just a few things with you guys to just wrap up the video. So I ended up finishing the sleeve with the white, and I added 4 extra rows. So instead of 11 rows of the white, I did 15 rows just because I knew it was going to curl up a little bit, so I wanted the blocking to still be even. So that is one thing that I did. And then this morning I weaved in my ends, and I don't have a great method for weaving in the ends, so I'm not gonna, walk you through that because there's probably a better way to do it. But all I did was kind of a duplicate stitch method. With the looser knits, it's a little bit harder to hide the ends, so I just did duplicate stitching. I know you shouldn't tie knots in your knits, but I find that that's the best way to kind of keep them secured in these looser knits, or else they just fall out. And it's my sweater, so I don't really care if there's little ends in the inside, but as you can see, I did not weave in all of them. I only weaved in the ones that were sticking out, so I definitely have to get around to it sometime anyways. I did a little mending around that little hole that you have when you connect the sleeves, kind of like a duplicate stitch as well. I'll put a clip in so you guys can see what I do. It's not perfect, it's messy, it's just how I did it. And just with looser knits in general, it's so hard to keep the tension constant. I personally like the way that it looks. It looks a little bit more distressed, so that's kind of what I go for. But if you're looking to do a tighter knit, maybe watch your tension around your increases. And I just want to say, I am not an expert at knitting at all. Like, I make so many mistakes, I'm messy, and this might not be the perfect Raglan tutorial, but I wish that there was something like this out there when I learned how to do it. So I'm making this for you guys because I want you guys to be able to know how to do top down sweaters. I know they're very intimidating at first. I'm hoping that this helped out. So let's just wrap up all the steps. So the first thing that we did was we did the neckline ribbing, and then we did increases at 4 points up until where we wanted our sleeve hole to end. And then we tied off the sleeves and casted on a few stitches and knit the rest of the body. Then after that, we casted off, picked up the sleeve stitches, and then we picked up a few of those casted on stitches plus the extra to kind of fill the hole there. And then we knit our sleeves, casted them off, and then normally that's when you would weave in all of your ends. I weaved in a couple of them, and that's pretty much what the raglan is, at least my concept of the raglan. I'm really hoping that I left it open enough where you guys can adjust it to your liking. For example, if you want your sweater to be shorter, just don't do as many rows around the body. If you want your sleeves to be tighter, don't do as many increases. If you want the sleeves to be longer, knit longer. If you want them to be shorter, don't knit as long. If you want to do a cuff, do some ribbing. If you want to do a flare sleeve, then start increasing 3/4 of the length of the sleeve. If you want to make a shrug, don't do as many increases. Instead of stripes, you want to do checkers, then you would just switch colors more often in the row. And I am hoping that I made it pretty open so you guys can adjust it and play around with it, make different things. So yeah, I just really hope that this was helpful. Even if it was helpful to just one person, like, that would make me happy. If you do follow along or take any inspiration from this video, please tag me on Instagram or DM me a photo. I would love to see it. I'd love to see what other people make. And while you're at it, make sure you follow me on Instagram. I'm trying to post more styling stuff, like styling my knit pieces on there, and save the long form content like tutorials for YouTube. I'll be posting more tutorials, so make sure you subscribe or like this video, comment. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Yeah, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Sorry it was kind of a long video. I mean, obviously it's a big piece, so it's gonna take a long time, but I hope you guys have a great day or night or morning whenever you're watching this. Thanks for watching. Bye.